Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and our guest this evening is the President of the City Council for the City of Beverly, Julie Flowers. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, what triggered this one was, I guess you proposed a order for the City Council to acknowledge that Beverly is sitting on what used to be Indian land way back when. And it almost passed, but it's really part of, I guess, an overall plan of how do we make Beverly a welcoming community. And I think there's been an effort several times already to do different things like fly appropriate flags and put up banners and so forth. And I guess what I'd like to start with is, where do you see Beverly going in becoming more welcoming?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question and a really broad one. And you're right. I did sort of begin this term right at the inauguration, actually, for all of the elected officials. And I was able to share in my remarks there a land statement acknowledging, as you said, that Beverly, like all communities, across our country, is built on native land, and acknowledging the people who were here before us first. Mm-hmm. We talk about the Namkeg or the Pawtucket tribes. Those are really bands of what now we would call just the Massachusetts tribe. Mm-hmm. And so I had the opportunity to meet and talk with members of that tribe and work with them. So, I learned a lot. And my hope was that in having this conversation, and I think this has happened, as you said, to change the order of our agenda to add this officially, we needed 6 votes, not 5. It needs a 2/3 vote, not a simple majority. But my hope was that it could be part of this broader conversation in any case about how we continue to learn together as a community and to be an increasingly welcoming, diverse, and equitable community. So, one of the things that I think has been really, I think, positive that's come out of this conversation is the conversation itself. I've had conversations with my fellow counselors, but also with many people in Beverly, just continuing to learn together about what does it mean even to acknowledge land and to celebrate that, and what are some concrete ways that we might lean into and live into what that might mean to honor and acknowledge the Massachusetts tribe and the people who were here before us. And one kind of example that's, I think, really fits with who we are as a city is when I was talking with Thomas Green of the Massachusetts tribe, he said, one of the things is that Native and Indigenous people have always been calling for better care of the land. We've honored it, we live on it, we care for it. And so one way that people can honor that tradition and what we've been calling for is to do better care of the environment. And Beverly, this is sort of a different topic, but I think they're tied together. Beverly has been striving to be a greener and more resilient community. So, a concrete thing that we can do, I think, to honor the history of the people and the land is to continue to lean into that path. But one of the things that's also come out of this is we've had citizen speakers now sign up at every city council meeting to make a statement acknowledging the Native people whose land this was first. And in some ways that, to me, is even more powerful than perhaps the city council saying it, because it's really coming from people who are just citizens in the community taking an interest, learning more about it themselves, and coming to meetings and talking about it.
I think that's the crucial issue you just mentioned, learning about it yourself, in that there's a book that was written several years ago called The Mayflower. There's several of them around, but this one in particular, part of the advertising for the book was, history that is taught is, the Pilgrims landed in 1620. They had Thanksgiving dinner with the Indians. Everybody had turkey. And then we had the Revolution. And like 150 plus years of actual history gone by the wayside, just gone. And especially for this area, which was probably one of the first areas that really started to develop and has got records of what was going on, it's a fascinating story. And I think this is the kind of thing that needs to happen of what really happened, who was really there. And one of the episodes in the book that always blew my mind was the Pilgrims were here. They were living here for a while. They were farming and building houses and all that good stuff. And all of a sudden, an Indian walks into the village, the town, and he starts speaking perfect English. And what the heck happened? How did that happen? Well, it turns out he had gotten scooped up and taken to England and learned English, and he came back. And all these little anecdotes that come out of the story really make it, I think, more of a environment that people can relate to, as opposed to, well, we got to acknowledge this used to be Indian land. Well, I think there's more to the story than just acknowledging it, just knowing what was going on. And this is our area.
Yeah, I think you touched on an important point there, which is, the way that we're taught history sometimes is a narrow trajectory. And so a piece of this, I think, is, yes, the way that cities, communities, towns, and other countries have been using land acknowledgements in some cases much longer than is beginning to happen here in our country. So I think, it feels newer in some ways for some of us. But in Canada, in Australia, there's been a move to do this, and it sort of more seamlessly flows. I think, everything sort of is a matter of learning, as you said, and growing. Yeah. And so this is part of it is, talking more broadly about our history, as you were saying, and thinking about when we're talking about acknowledging the land and the first people, we're also talking about exactly what you said, which is uncovering more of the history and the story and the broadness of history, and honoring the people who are part of it. And, that I think is going to be an ongoing piece. You asked about Beverly. I think that's an ongoing piece of our work here in Beverly, not just when it comes to Indigenous and Native people, but that's part of the work that we've been doing as a community, in our schools and on the city side with our diversity and equity and inclusion work, beginning with these equity audits, which on the school and the city side. And a big piece of those audits is just to sort of illuminate what we don't know. There's people always say you never know what you never know.
Yeah.
We have to, I think, begin by uncovering what we don't know, so that then we can continue to work to expand sort of the history, the story, and learn more about how we can be a more diverse and equitable community.
Well, I think what a lot of people don't want to recognize is this is not a one-shot deal that all of a sudden you recognize this local minority group, and that's the end of it. And in reality, being a nation of immigrants, even the so-called indigenous people were immigrants. They came out of Asia. We did a show on that, several shows on that. But everybody that came here settled down in their own way. And sometimes it meshed very nicely with the environment, and sometimes it was at odds with it. And this is not only the environment that we talk about, the temperature, the weather, that kind of stuff, but what's going on around us. And I think just about every immigrant community has gone through some sort of traumatic experience to become Americans and become adjusted. And I think people have to recognize that this is not something new. This has been going on for 300-400 years, and it's just another episode in it. And hopefully we get to the point where we can go through these episodes a lot smoother than what we've done in the past. And I think that's where I would like to see the emphasis on of how do we smooth this out and make this happen gracefully instead of traumatically. And the traumatic experience that I think happened here is the mayor put up the Gay Pride Flag. He took down the veterans flag to do it. That went over like a concrete Zeppelin. Next thing you know, the veterans, or somebody, let's put it that way, somebody took down the gay flag and put the veterans flag back up again. So these kind of motions, I think, aggravate the situation. There's got to be a smoother way to recognize that, hey, people are different. Lots of people do different things, and stop worrying about it.
Yeah, I think something that you said in there when you said this isn't a one-shot thing, I think that's exactly it. That this is, it's not any one thing that we do or one moment or one word that's going to suddenly be the magic fix for figuring out, how do we repair hurts of the past and move forward towards a more just and equitable future, as you're talking about. But I think you're exactly right to say that it's an ongoing process. And so, one of the things that I was talking about in one of the conversations I was in about the land acknowledgement was sort of touching on, this is not exactly what you were saying, but touching on sort of that same question of there's so many people in our country, there's for Black Americans, there's been hurts in the past. And so how do we repair some of that hurt and also move forward in a better way, in a more just way? And for Native people and for immigrant populations who have come to this country, certainly you could look at Chinese immigrants when they came and how they were treated in terms of being made to work to build the railroads, or Japanese people during World War II. And so what I was saying is exactly what you said. There's not sort of one magic fix. The way I see it is it's a broad and big conversation that there's sort of going to be many tools in our toolbox, and there's going to potentially be sort of different ways that we can honor, lift up, celebrate, or help to repair some of those hurts of the past or those injustices of the past. And then I think my view is sort of the most important piece then is once we see that expanded history, as you were talking about, and learn more about it, how are we going to move forward together in a way that disrupts the system the way that it's been and creates something different? And I think what you're seeing is all of these little conversations, even the ones that feel hard in the moment, because you're right, some of them feel hard and they are painful. And I think part of it is being unafraid as a community to sort of look some of these hard conversations in their face and say, we're going to have them, we're going to work on them together. And then as we learn, how do we build a community that does not repeat some of the systemic kind of oppression of the past?
That's I think the key issue. Not repeat the same old process that all of a sudden you're the new bunch of immigrants, and we're probably going to see a bunch of Ukrainians show up here shortly, and you get to the point where this new group comes in and said, oh yeah, they have to live over there. And then they get treated like such and such, and we just go through the same ritual all over again. So I think that's the thing I'm meaning when I'm talking about, you got to smooth this out. Just recognize that, hey, people are different. They came here for a reason. We're all here now, and we got to make the best of it. And it's not one-size-fits-all kind of game that you can, that's what we did the last time. It didn't work the last time as smoothly as we wanted.
Yeah, and celebrating people's, I like that you said people are all different, because I think sometimes the way that I think our sort of system in our country, not just in Beverly, but we've maintained some what we felt like was homeostasis or some kind of balance by trying to say like, well, we're all people and we're all the same. And I think in the end, what we're learning is a more positive way forward is to say, actually, we're all different. And that can be a really positive thing. How do we celebrate our differences? So instead of being afraid of one another's differences or using them to decide who gets more and who gets less, or as you said, who has to live in a certain area. I know you've had lots of conversations with me and with others about zoning, but zoning was used often to zone people in or out. So instead of using our difference in a way that's to divide or to oppress one another, really saying we are all different. And what if we celebrated that and learned more about each other's differences? What kind of community could we build then?
We're the same and yet we're different. Sure. And as I mentioned, we did a show with Jack Quigley, 4 shows actually, talking about where we came from and how we got here. And we're all the same, but there are differences depending upon which way we got here. And that's just the way it is. And the other point I think we started to get into about the zoning issue, and I think we mentioned before the show started that had a discussion last week with Andrew DeFrenza, and one of the things that he brought up is that, okay, there is being considered right now a overlay for the Bass River area and it's been kicked around a couple of times. The Ward 2 Civic Association had a few things to say about it. It wasn't terribly positive. But at the same time, we get into some of these issues again of some people want to build lots of condos and respond to the governor's plea for Transient Oriented Development. And the Bass River area being adjacent to the train station, obviously, that's a good place to do it. There's a group of people who have an interest in making the city walkable. So walking from the Bass River to the train station, that's a given. And you get into some of these things, and at the same time, the people say, well, wait a minute, we got this river here. We got this waterfront area. How do we get access to it? How do we get recreation? So you can see all these conflicts coming together, and they're not conflicts on issues of race or color or national origin or any of that stuff. They're conflicts on my understanding of what my city ought to be. And everybody's got a different opinion on that. And we have to get into a blending process of, well, we need some of this and some of that, but we can't have all of that. We can't have all of this. And I think this is one of the areas that needs to be resolved. And the other thing that Andrew mentioned that surprised me is that the city council, in reviewing this Bass River overlay, has the authority to say, okay, we're going to have so much inclusion housing in the area, which means affordable housing that is affordable. And we can set the limits on what is defined as affordable. So I guess the question for you is that how deep is the city council going to get into the Bass River overlay, and how much initiative are you prepared to exercise?
Yeah, thank you. Those are really big and important questions, and you're right. Bass River is a huge topic right now in Beverly, and in some ways has been for a little while. I think with the most recent master plan and then some specific Bass River meetings, there's been conversation. So one of the things that you said that I think is really important is when you talked about maybe there needs to be some of this and some of this and some of this, and we bring different things together. Because even, as people have been talking with me about the Bass River, or as I've attended some of the community meetings, you're right that there's really differing views about it. But what I hear most overarching from people is that people aren't opposed to having any change to the zoning there, but people are concerned about bringing in those different threads. And so how do we create a space that brings in access to the waterfront, open space for recreation, housing that's needed, but that's truly affordable? I've heard people have talked about, if there is housing there, will it be truly affordable? Because I think in our community, there is a real recognition that there is an affordability crisis. And so, right, so part of it is, if there's going to be housing there, will it be really higher rent, or how can we ensure that there's more access to it? And then some commercial space. I know there's people who, as you said, walkability. I've talked to families in Ryleside who would love, some commercial and restaurant kind of space that is really walkable right there. I think part of the conversation is just about what works best there. Is it, and a potential projection came out that said could be up to 1,000 units of housing, and I think that's what made people feel anxious. And I think with good reason, because I think that kind of gets to your question about how do we balance all of these different needs in our community. And my sense is that we really need to, as a city council and as city leaders, listen to what we're hearing from our community, listen to this feedback. And I do think it's possible to put together a way that we move forward on how we want the Bass River to look for the future in a way that honors sort of what's being said. I think there can be housing there, but doesn't have to be on the scale of 1,000 units. I definitely am in favor of having some open space. One of the things that I keep saying, and this is sort of just a dream of mine, but I'm not sure we'll see it happen, but I keep talking about what if the city purchased some of that land, similar to what we just saw happen with Simon Street, where the city purchased, it's obviously smaller spaces available, but the city purchased 2 empty plots of land on Simon Street that had been owned by the Housing Authority to make them into parks for the neighborhood. And so I keep saying I would love to see us consider same kind of out of the box thinking, purchase some of the land in the Bass River to create, potentially a boardwalk, but other kinds of recreational space. I had said like a bocce ball court and a gaga ball pit, but something that people in Beverly could go and use and be together.
Yeah.
But I also think there's a way to use some of the space for some commercial and some housing. And I think with the housing, what you're asking is about the inclusionary zoning. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that I would be most interested in. If there is going to be housing that is coming into the community, we could work on or refine our inclusionary zoning ordinance to make it, as you said, higher levels of inclusionary zoning. Yeah. So higher percentages of the units within a building would be affordable or more deeply affordable. And I think that's what Andrew was talking about. What right now we have an inclusionary zoning ordinance that says that developers can do fewer units at a more deeply affordable, so a bigger percentage off market rent, or they can do more units at a slightly less affordable rate. And what gets so tricky, as you know really well, because you've had these conversations with Andrew and with me and with others, when you live in a place that is high cost of living, like our area, what counts as affordable by sort of these metrics that the government uses still is very unattainable for a lot of people. And so that's where I would love to see us refine our inclusionary zoning ordinance so that we actually encourage that deeper affordability at higher percentages of units. Yeah. So it's not just a small handful that go with that really deep affordability.
Well, the other part of that issue comes down to one of that area is what they refer to as the vibrant part of the city. A lot of service jobs in that area. And these are the people that need to get some sort of affordable housing that they can afford. And I sort of parroted from the complete streets concept of the streets are designed so that walking, bicycles, and cars can co-inhabit the area without causing too many problems. Well, I think we should have a complete city concept where everybody that works here can afford to live here.
Yeah.
Which means that you have to provide some kind of space that you can convert into affordable housing. And one of the other issues we got into with Andrew was that, there's a caveat in the inclusionary zoning bit that, you have to provide so many affordable units, but I will contribute some money to the fund to do it elsewhere. And that may be all well and good for the contractor and the construction company, but it turns the onus on top of the city as to where are we going to do that? Where are we going to find some land on that? And not to be too redundant, but I point out that the area I live in, according to the city's assessment, it's worth $1 million an acre. I can't see the city coming up with $1 million to buy an acre of land anywhere in the city to convert it into affordable housing. So I'm somewhat at a loss, and I guess I'm looking for some guidance as to, what the heck can we do?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In our inclusionary zoning right now, there is a provision that says that a developer, if they don't want to include any affordable units in the new building, they can contribute to the Affordable Housing Trust. And you're exactly right. That could then be used to do affordable housing elsewhere.
Yeah.
One of the changes that I've been talking about that I would like to see if we're going to work on this ordinance, and I think we should. I think it's good, and I also think what we know now is we could even do better.
Yeah.
So I would love to see us remove sort of that idea that you can pay your way out of including affordable units. And if we're going to keep it, I think it should be actually more money paid in. That there should be a higher threshold to sort of invest in affordable housing. But my overarching view is that made sense for the time that piece of the ordinance was written, and I think in my view, it's time to remove that and just really think about how we do the affordable housing as we bring housing in, because we know that there's a real affordability crisis happening, and of course, it is regional. So Beverly alone isn't going to be able to fix what's happening sort of in our region.
Yeah.
But as you and I have talked about before too, doing our part is an important piece of how we make sure, as you said, that people who work here can afford to live here, or people whose children have grown up here and now are young adults they want to be able to live here.
Yeah.
That's really hard for people to be able to come back and live in the community they grew up in. Or, I talk to a lot of seniors who are ready to sell their home in Beverly, would like to maybe sell their home and downsize and find there's nowhere that they can afford to move to in their community. And, I think we need to address those realities so that, as you said, we have a city where people who want to call Beverly home can afford to call Beverly home. And I think working on our zoning ordinance is going to be a piece of that.
Well, that's part of being a complete city.
Absolutely.
And for instance, we don't have anything equivalent to, say, a Brooksby Village. And yet, we're a city of 45,000 people, heading towards 50. Why wasn't this included somewhere in the game? You start to ask some of these questions about how do we complete the city? And of course, part of the thing is, hey, that's my vision. You got your vision. Somebody over there's got their vision. And we're back to this issue of how do we get together and smooth out the differences and reach a consensus? And I think that's where the emphasis has to be.
Yeah, and I think the community meeting on the Bass River that I attended at the Ayers School, which had folks from Ryle side, but also, as you said, downtown, Ward 2, and really from all over the city. I think community meetings like that are a piece of how we're going to do that. Because as I said to you, I think really listening to each other and then working together to sort of incorporate feedback and move forward is going to be a way that we can, as you said, bring together some of the different visions that we have and continue to move forward to be this kind of complete city that you envision.
Great. And lo and behold, we're at our half hour.
It always flies by when I'm talking with you.
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah.
And we're having an intelligent discussion, and I think this is what needs to continue to happen. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for watching us. And this discussion is going to have to go on some more. We'll have to do some more of this. And again, if you have a different opinion or you have a similar opinion and you would like to have your voice heard at the table, send me an email and we'll make it happen. And thanks again for watching us, and see you next time.